are Colin, Dave and Pam's son. Well, I'm trying to do how he's related to everybody else, but Colin Crowns, those are his best friends. Jonathan is his best friend since like second grade, so they've been a pretty integral part of their family life. Anything else?
There's a family that goes to school of our kids at the school that I'm from. Their dad just got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Their children some of their children are our age, our children's age. And now they found out he has bacterial meningitis. It's just like this, went in for some pain in the stomach, and it looks like now he might not be going home. So they lost a 6-year-old child a few years ago, and now it looks like she's immune to it. So they're trying to transfer the family. Last name is Hopkins.
I clarify this every time. I'm not up here like texting people. I'm writing them down. I just don't want that person to be like, oh, really? During prayer request? You're up there updating Facebook? Yes.
Karen's father's some health issues.
Ooh, autocorrect didn't like that. I'm just going to leave it as Carrie's because I'll say it wrong. I don't know. All right, let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the day. Thank you for the overcast and the rain because it brings flowers. Help us to be optimistic, especially when we're showing out-of-town visitors our state and it just rains the whole time. Thank you for all your blessings. Thank you for our church family and our friendships and the love that we have. Thank you that we can come together and study your word collectively, and we can take part in communion and hear a portion of your word and pray and sing together. Thank you for Bible class and the opportunity to discuss your word and have deeper thought and deeper understanding and answer questions together. We ask for this opportunity to bring our prayer requests before you. Be with Travis's grandmother who's still in hospice. Be with those who support her during this time and help things to be as painless and as easy as possible, but also be with the family as they struggle during any time such as this. Be with Jonathan and Jamie Core as Jamie was in a car accident and is dealing with some head trauma. Car accidents and head trauma and just accidents in general are so sporadic in how they affect people and their driving and their perception and their healing process. So we ask your hand in that. We ask that you be with the Haters, the family friend from school, the Hopkins that is diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and bacterial meningitis. That is unbearably trying on the family. Help the Haters to be a source of encouragement, as well as be with the doctors and the nurses and anyone that attends to that. And if possible, we ask for healing, but also be with them as this is a serious and grave diagnosis. And also be with Carrie's father as he's dealing with health issues. Any other prayer requests that were not listed or that were not mentioned, we ask those to be with you as well, and we ask all these things in your will and in Jesus' name, amen. All right, so we're going to start right back where we left off. I'm always going to short myself on time, such is life. We left off in Exodus 11. We knocked out 9 plagues. We're on plague number 10. God was teaching the Israelites this deep spiritual lesson. I think anybody that looks at this can't not see that it points to Christ. Unlike the other plagues, the Israelites survived by virtue of their identity as God's people. This plague required an act of faith on them as well. God commanded all the families to take an unblemished male lamb and kill it, and the blood of the lamb was smeared on the top and the sides of their doorway, and then that lamb was roasted and eaten that night. Any family that did not follow God's instructions would suffer the last plague. That's always been something curious to me, that you imagine that one Israelite family that's like, yeah, we're not doing that. I don't want to do that. And you're like, sure? Like, I think that's what we should do. God described to them how he's going to send this destroyer through the land of Egypt with orders to slay the firstborn male in every household, humans and animals. Their only protection was the blood of the lamb on the door. And when the destroyer saw the blood, he would pass over that house and leave it untouched. Obviously, this is where we get the term Passover, and it's a memorial of that night in ancient Egypt when God delivered his people from bondage. Is that me? Doing updates? 2.7. You can't not read that and have that be a connection to Christ. Obviously, you read later on, we are taught that Jesus becomes our Passover when he died to deliver us from the bondage of sin. And while the Israelites found God's protection in their homes, every other home in the land of Egypt experienced God's wrath as their loved ones and their firstborn all died. This wild, grievous event clearly caused Pharaoh to finally release the Israelites. A question that's an ethics question that people ask a lot of times, though, is the 10th plague, right? The death of Egypt's firstborn. All firstborn, human and animals. People see that and they go, well, how is this just? How is this loving, compassionate, almighty, amazing God, how is he just in murdering a bunch of babies and a bunch of firstborn animals? So I pose it to you. How is it just?
Well, I think when you think about other massacres, other wholesale acts of genocide, it says nothing about their eternal state. That is still in the hands of the just God, and he will make all things right.
So when you think about this, you think about this 10th plague, the firstborn sons of Egypt that God sent over the nation of Egypt. And it was the one that finally ends this brutal enslavement, right? The other 9 plagues were terrible. 7 through 10, like you read this, they weren't easy plagues either. And the 10th plague seems particularly harsh. And so some commentators and some non-believers and questioners of the word always challenge that, how would God allow that? Why would God do that? I don't understand. You talk about this God of mercy and yet he kills it. I think there's 2 huge things to consider here. The first one is God gave Pharaoh and the Egyptians 9 warnings. Like he didn't just show up one day and go, I'm going to kill everybody if you don't do what I say. Like they had 9 plagues before this, before he sent the plagues, this 10th final plague that was the death of the firstborn. With each plague, the Egyptians and Pharaoh had this opportunity to repent, to release the Israelites. Every time Pharaoh refuses. 3 times Pharaoh says he's going to release them and then changes his mind. So you think about this, and this wasn't just some isolated decision that God made. He worked his way through this process, and the rebellion and the hard-heartedness and the arrogance and the hubris that Pharaoh had. He was not going to relent. And I think the other part is God not only gave them these opportunities, but he also gave advanced warning of what this was going to be, this last plague. He says, this is what's going to happen. If you don't let them go, the firstborn of every household is going to die. It wasn't a surprise. It wasn't something that he pulled a rabbit out of his hat. Even after these warnings and all these plagues, Pharaoh was not releasing the Israelites from slavery. And the second one to consider, in my opinion, is Pharaoh and the Egyptians brought these plagues upon themselves, right? You're reading these stories and you're reading these edicts from the king of Egypt. The Pharaoh gave this order to all his people. Every Hebrew boy that is born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. That command was given prior to Moses' birth. 80 years later, Moses comes to Pharaoh and asks him to release them from slavery. They don't even have an indication that this murdering of the boys ever stopped. It doesn't specifically say, hey, we quit doing that. It could go either way. Obviously, we read about the numbers increasing and Israel going from a small group to a huge group. But how many thousands of Israelites have been murdered by Egyptians? And how many Israelite men and women had been murdered during that time of slavery? Slavery in any time period is brutal. And so this 10th plague and the death of the firstborn in Egypt was poetic justice. It was, they had been targeting Hebrew boys for slaughter for so long. And so there's no denying that this 10th plague causing the firstborn deaths was severe. But with brutal slavery and countless deaths, whether adults or infants, they kind of brought that judgment on themselves. You haven't been, this wasn't an innocent people that were just living in a field and then God said, let my people go, or I'm gonna kill all your firstborn. This had been abuse for generations. And God promises that, I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And the Egyptians, in choosing to curse Abraham's children, brought a curse on themselves. Did you have your hand up? I thought I saw your hand go up. Oh, okay. So now we move into Pharaoh's response. Utter calamity happens, right? He gets his playhouse burned to the ground here. and the whole of Egypt is up in the middle of the night wailing at this loss. Like, people go out and find their firstborn animals dead, their firstborn sons dead. I would imagine it probably was football game sound throughout the entirety of the land. Just people screaming and crying at this horrific thing that's happened. And you think about this. These are choices that Pharaoh made. You brought this as the leader. You brought this on your people. And God had informed his mind and told him, and ultimately he had to break his will. Pharaoh's problem wasn't that there was insufficient intellectual evidence. It was that his heart had to be broken. I think my dad 2-3 weeks ago said, some things harden up in the sun and some things get soft in the sun. And this was a hard-hearted person that was stubborn and believed himself to be, Egyptian god, and he wasn't going to let somebody else tell him what to do. So the text here says, then he called for Moses and Aaron by night and said, rise, go out from among my people, both you and the children of Israel. Go and serve the Lord as you have said. Also take your flocks and your herds as you have said, and be gone, and bless me also. So even here, he didn't just allow them to leave, he commanded them to go. And if you go back to Exodus 11:1, this is what God told Moses was going to happen. When he lets you go, he will surely drive you out of here altogether. I always think it's interesting to read this story and the bless me also. Pharaoh now knows who God is. Like, you fought this and you battled him and you went through 10 different plagues and you got to see miraculous, inexplicable things happening, and you question this whole time whether or not the God that they serve is real or not. Well, you got to see it, and this God is greater than you and greater than your Egyptian gods, and he had to get broken down to see this. But then he sees, like, and bless me while you're at it, like, leave me something here, because you guys took hold of us here. And then you read in the story that Israel took gold and all sorts of stuff. That the story always gets told, that I remember, hearing it on a flannel board and that kind of thing, that the Israelites plundered Egypt on the way out. That's how we tell the story. They took stuff as they went, and they took the riches of Egypt. But man, we might think that, but it also feels like the Egyptian people agreed that it was time to go. They almost were paying them to leave. Like, just take whatever you want, just go. Like, look what you guys did to us. All right, so then we have the Exodus. We're here. The book's name for it, we're here. So the children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Sukkoth, about 600,000 men on foot besides children. A mixed multitude went up with them also, in flocks and herds, a great deal of livestock, and they baked unleavened cakes out of the dough which they had brought out of Egypt. For it was not leavened, because they were driven out of Egypt and could not wait, nor had they prepared provisions for themselves. So we get this moment that all these previous chapters of Exodus have worked themselves up to, and what we've been anticipating. Israel is now free. Pharaoh and his armies did not hold them back as they traveled from their center of Ramses to Sukkoth. So 600,000 men on foot. This number is pretty challenged across the board, commentators, different religious groups. In theory, when they say men, they mean men. So let's double that. They all have wives. And then kids, there's no number there. I don't know what the Israelite per capita was at the time. Maybe it was 1.5 children per family. It doesn't matter. But we're not talking like a state fair or a baseball game crowd here. We are talking a multitude of people. the city of Phoenix. The city of Philadelphia is 1.6. So in the end of 12, in this first half of chapter 13, we see them exiting, and God does something immediately. God immediately starts wanting them to commemorate what just happened. He starts setting things in place of feasts and actions to be taken to commemorate this. And he's done this amazing thing. He's freed them from slavery and from oppression, and now he's putting his ownership stamp already. Like, not only are you free, but you're mine. You're my people, and you're going to do certain things that only my people do. And people are going to know you're my people. You're going to take a Passover, and you're going to take it this way. And they're going to know what I did, right? And in chapter 13, he continues to give instructions to Israel on their departure. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, consecrate me all the firstborn, whatever opens the womb among the children of Israel, both of man and beast, it is mine. If you spend a little bit of time looking at the grammar here, consecrate does mean sacrifice, but it also means consider it belonging to God, right? Like, God is saying, I am your source here. I am your freedom. I am your God. And the firstborn belongs to me. So when he says it's mine, the firstborn is mine, what are the reasons in that? I thought of three, but I'm curious what you think. Why would God make a significance of the firstborn of every one of you belongs to me?
The heir
Uh-huh.
of that family.
Yeah. Good. What else?
Christ, I guess, being firstborn.
Sure. Points to it, absolutely. Anything else?
Passover seeing the firstborn.
Mm-hmm. So if we head all the way back to Exodus 4, Israel was God's firstborn. This practice pretty much honors that. Second, this isn't always true, and it certainly isn't true in the modern days, but it was considered that the firstborn was thought to be the best, and that was given to God. Those of you who are siblings might argue that point today, but as an only child, I absolutely concur with that. That is true in all forms.
I don't know, my thought was first love. It's
Mhm.
not that, I mean, that's kind of a special bond you have. I mean, even as a parent.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this reminder to all these generations of when God redeemed Israel, his firstborn was from Egypt. They brought them out of Egypt, yes.
So God created Adam and Eve, but this process of creating humans after that was entrusted to us, and it represents our first godly act of creation, if you will.
One commentary I read said Israel had been saved through the destruction of Egypt's firstborn, and now they were required to dedicate their own firstborn as a constant memorial of their deliverance. So there's a number of directions you can take there, but it was very significant. Then Moses sets up the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And Moses said to the people, remember this day in which you went out of Egypt in the house of bondage, for by the strength of hand the Lord brought you out of this place. No leavened bread shall be eaten. And then in 8 through 10 he says, and you shall tell your son in that day, saying, this is done because of what the Lord did for me when I came up from Egypt. It shall be as a sign to you on your hand and a memorial between your eyes, and the Lord's law may be in your mouth. For with a strong hand and the Lord has brought you out of Egypt. You shall therefore keep this ordinance in its season from year to year. And it will be a sign on your hand as a memorial between your eyes. Modern day Judaism, they wear phylacteries and they put these little boxes on their head. Whether or not that's what it was trying to say, we're not going to talk about. The point there is God is putting forward this ideology for these people of remember to tell people what happened here. Remember to tell your kids, tell their kids, to tell their kids what I did here. And not that it shouldn't have been this way, like not that that remembrance shouldn't have been that way, but God wanted this deliverance from Egypt to be constantly at hand and on their mouths and in their hearts and known with each other. He wanted these people who were freshly delivered. I mean, we're talking walking out the door, we're just on the other side of the gate, and already he's going, hey, make sure you don't forget what just happened. Why? Why? Was God just that arrogant? And he was like, make sure everybody remembers what I did here. I want the attention. Is that it? No. So why is it? Or people. What do people do? We forget. We forget. We get distracted. We fail. And so that prosperity should have been already established. I would have been immediately, I say this in hindsight, like it feels like I would have been like, let's make a plaque. Let's do something here so that everybody for all eternity knows what happens. But again, this whole study, a study of this narrative, you can't look at it in the, well, here's what I would have done. Those guys were failures. I would have done better. We wouldn't have. You're looking at this, and just like when you read, a lot of times you can read in the language transition in Hebrew that Adam is Adam, the guy, but it's also humanity. And so one might look back at Genesis, and you're in the garden, you go, well, I wouldn't have eaten the fruit. I would have made it. All right, well, good on you, but somebody was going to, because humanity was going to. Humanity was ultimately tempted. Yes, Dirk?
I was just thinking, that God's gonna give them the law and give all this organization. So I think, they had 400 years of disorganization. So he's starting to put them together, put the pieces back together make them into a people and a nation, right?
Good. So then there's a little section here interesting in verses 17 and 18. And I guess if you did know about this already, good on you. You're better than me. But I guess I've never heard this before. 17 and 18. Then it came to pass when Pharaoh had let the people go, that God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, lest perhaps the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea. And the children of Israel went up in orderly ranks out of the land in Egypt. So God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. Has anybody heard that before? Are you aware of that? Am I just, don't read my Bible enough? My Bible degree wasn't. I looked it up though. I looked this up. The coastal route, the way of the sea, was crazy shorter way to go from Egypt to Canaan. Like that was the way, that was the road that people took. And God knew his people weren't ready to face this yet. Like he already was aware they're going to see desolation. They're going to see war out there. I don't want them to be, I just freed the bunny and I don't want it to go, oh, I got to run back in the cage. He led them this different way, right? He leads them another way. The Israelites probably, I would imagine even in slavery, probably knew the quickest way to go. Maybe they got to take field trips and go out and go gather materials. I'm not sure. But I would imagine that the shortest distance, that's a trade route where food and water is brought and you interact with people. But the dangers on the way, God anticipates these dangers that they wouldn't know about, they wouldn't see. So long before any grumbling, long before like, what are you doing to us out here, God? They already have their first provision. Like appreciation should be the word of the day. And I don't know, we aren't told who in leadership here, if Moses, if the elders, if who's leading them out is being told, hey, we're going to go this way because of this. This is my thought process, guys, as the Almighty and the creator of the universe. Here's what we're going to do. Well, we don't have that. But I would assume it was just, you're going to go this way. One commentary said he carefully chose their way out of Egypt, not the nearer, but the safer. He tempts not above what we are able, but so orders the matter that evils are not ready for us until we for them. So that obviously has the allusion to God doesn't tempt us beyond what we're able of handling. And then we read that Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had placed the children of Israel under solemn oath, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here with you. Pretty big act of faith to ask your body to get carried out of Egypt. He did this because he knew that Egypt was not their final resting place, but that God had this promised land for them. It says specifically here, God surely will visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here with you. Joseph wasn't ever buried his coffin laid above the ground for these 400 years before they were taken back to Canaan. It was this kind of silent witness for these people that Israel was going back to a promised land of what God had promised. And now this promise is being fulfilled. So now we get the fun flannel board story that we all heard growing up if you grew up in church, right? That Israel was led by the cloud by day and the fire by night. So they took their journey from Sukkoth and camped in Etham and at the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead the way, and at night by a pillar of fire to give them light. So that as to go by day and night, he did not take away the pillar of cloud by day or the pillar of fire by night from before the people. I always thought that was interesting that, your night lights and your motion activated lights, you clap and it comes on for a minute and then it goes off after a while. And no, God, it didn't turn off. It was there all night long for everybody to have this encouragement with. These people had the opportunity to have continual and solid, deep assurance of God's presence with them. It was a constant 24/7 reminder that we have something to look at letting us know God's here, and we've been let out. And nevertheless, though, we will have many occasions after this that we'll get into where they just doubt and they rebel and they act like God was distant and God left them out to dry and God has abandoned them. So we move into chapter 14. And we're moving into the crossing of the Red Sea, right? The story of stories here. And verses 1 through 4 talk about God drawing Pharaoh to come out against Israel. Rough shot here. Then I will harden Pharaoh's heart so that he will pursue them, and I will gain honor over Pharaoh and over all his army. Then that the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So God says you will camp before it by the sea, and it will look like you were bewildered by the land. It's a curious strategy here that God pretty much sets an ambush for Pharaoh. He sets it up to look like they're out free, and they're, like I said, they're little baby bunnies that don't know where to go now. We're flush here against the water and we're stuck. And even after this horror and the death of the firstborn, Pharaoh's change and his end to his hubris and his rebellion against God, it was only temporary. And he decides to go get Israel back and bring them back to Egypt. So it's interesting here, and this was a conversation that Jan and I had a few weeks ago. We're not going to delve into 18th century slavery with America. We're not going to delve into slavery really in general, but just the idea of oppression. And oppressors are usually dramatically outnumbered by those they oppress, right? So Jan and I were talking about this, and he was asking, how did they allow, if they were such big in numbers, how did they allow Egypt to oppress them? And him and I had a conversation about, you look at any form of oppression in history, the oppressors could have easily gone, all right, enough's enough here. There's 1,000 of us and there's 10 of them. Let's lay waste. But that's how oppression works. They overpower you mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, ideologically. And so, rough numbers here, 1,000 Egyptians, give or take, are going to handle 1 million plus Israelites. That's just crazy to me. That's crazy that your hubris says, we have chariots, which, imagine people on foot versus the Jeep Cherokee of the day, but still, you're okay, more power to you, dude. So Pharaoh says, why did we do this? Why did we let them go? He starts having this conversation with his people. What motivated us to just give up? It's like, I don't know, the 10 plagues you just experienced, that might have had something to do with it. But this demonstrates, even if Pharaoh isn't a person of God, this demonstrates how often we quickly forget of what God has done and what he's demonstrated, whether we're on his side or not, right? And obviously this will be a problem that Israel has soon. They quickly forget what's done. I thought it was interesting in doing this study. I wonder if maybe Pharaoh thought this was the limit of God's power. Maybe his attitude and his mentality here was, all right, God showed what he can do. That's it. Now I'm going to go take back the people. Now I'm going to go get back my slaves because we got bricks to be made. And he thinks he's going to successfully make a strike against the Israelites. I thought, obviously in any class, whether it's an Old Testament narrative or you're studying Pauline epistles, whatever you're doing, right? You think about how it can be applicable to a Christian today. And maybe sometimes about that in their Christian life. Maybe sometimes you think, all right, I became a Christian, the devil's done with me. Like we're good, I got away from him, I'm no longer under his compulsion to live for myself. Now I'm under Jesus, now I'm good and I'm not going to get attacked anymore. So then we get our really Israel moment here, our real first moment of questioning and doubting and grumbling. Chapter 14, 10 through 12. And when Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. So they were very afraid, and the children of Israel cried out to the Lord. And then they said to Moses, because there were no graves in Egypt, have you taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you so dealt with us to bring us up out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we told you in Egypt, saying, let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than we should die in the wilderness. So without doing hindsight, right, without saying, well, those dummies, they shouldn't have been afraid, you should have been confident in God. It makes sense for them to be afraid. It makes sense. That's not fair to say you see a giant army of people coming at you and how dare you have any human interaction. That's not fair. But they also just forgot what just happened. This isn't something like a generation ago. And you think about, well, what if we go to war today? Well, look, 100 years ago we went to war and we were successful then, so we're good now. It just happened. And so it's hard to console with the Israelites here personally. When I read the story, I have such a hard time of being like, you guys, you just got freed, you just escaped. How are you already what have you done to us? And so they're turning on Moses and they're turning on God here, who just showed this amazing power. The footprints are still there on the way out in the sand. It's that fresh. Thoughts? Am I out of pocket? Should I be more understanding?
We consider that they had generations of oppression too, right? Just daily they were working under these people, right? So they have all this tradition. What?
Tradition.
Tradition.
That's the-
That tradition
being
of
suppressed.
being under the thumb, and then they know what it's like to do wrong, then they get hurt for it. So here it comes. It's
Yep.
coming again. You're going to get a whooping. You're going to get hurt because of it.
And maybe it's Stockholm Syndrome. I know that's not a thing then. That's a modern day psychological evaluation. But maybe we're so used to this, right? We don't know anything else.
Yeah.
And admittedly, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, when you have a group of people, this happens. People go through something difficult. A team can unite and do something really well, and then minutes later they're struggling with the next thing. And so I think that part of it can be a little frustrating, but especially when you lead people, they have these struggles constantly to get through these things. So it seems like a very human story.
And to Israel's credit, right? Admittedly, looking at it in hindsight and being like, what in the world, you guys? That they did cry out to God. They did the right thing. They did we need help. What's going on here? I thought we were free. Whatever. God is our refuge and strength, very present help in trouble, right? Their fear and their cry to the Lord makes sense. But yeah, the words to Moses and God is just seeing this total loss of confidence for me as I read it. And I'm not saying I'm any better. I'm probably worse. I probably do that. They're like, God, I was asking for all green lights to work today and I was late. That's your fault. They're like, really, dude? You got air in your lungs, you got a kid, a wife, You're pretty blessed. I'm not sure what you're upset about.
What degree do you think of it's groupthink? Whenever groupthink happens, when the marching orders come from within, in other words, their thinking is derived from within rather than from without, that is from God. Groupthink is always a scary thing.
Sure. And I think it's hard too, now you multiply not just, and you're 100% correct, I don't disagree at all, but not just group work together, but group work of like, we're gonna start on fiery coals, and then we're all gonna help each other get off the fiery coals, and then we're gonna climb a cliff. And when the group is getting ready to climb the cliff, they go, man, I'd rather be on the fiery coals again. I don't wanna climb the cliff. Like you already start to distort the past, thinking it was better to be in Egypt than to be here, right? Like, right or wrong, this mentality, it's this insecurity, right? But what they have that's great is they have leadership. And they have Moses here, who Moses' confidence was unlocked, and he shows this amazing response at this time. I mean, ultimately he struggles. In the future we read about major struggles, but we read here, and Moses said to the people, do not be afraid, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall see again no more forever. The Lord will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace. And it's interesting too, right? We read these narratives, we read these stories, and there's certain aspects that aren't written. And whether that's intentional or unintentional, it's a little subjective. But I don't know that Moses had any idea yet of what God was going to do. I don't know that he had the playbook of like, oh, okay. Guys, we're good. Like, I don't think he knew yet. Personally, I don't think he knew yet what God was going to do. All he knew was God was going to help. And God was going to take care of these people. And so in this sense, Moses knew that they were in such a bad situation before and God had come through. I don't have any doubt in my mind he's going to take care of us again. Moses says, see the salvation of the Lord. And again, Moses didn't know what he would do, but he knew what the result would be. He knew that God was going to save them in this predicament. He knew God would save the people and the enemy of the Lord would be destroyed. My buddy Jared is in town from Texas, and we had a buddy that got a cross tattoo on his ankle, and he got this verse, this Exodus 14:14, and we kind of joke with him that like, your verse with your cross was just stand still and let God take care of you. Like, that's a good Christian verse, buddy. But clearly what this verse was here, the connotation was, you just need to watch what God can do for you. You don't need to do anything. You just need to watch. He's going to take care of his people. We're going to stop here, and we're going to move into the crossing of the Red Sea and move forward into the wilderness starting next week. I will say it's interesting in reading commentaries and in reading stuff, there's a lot of people that belittle the crossing of the Red Sea. There's a lot of people that say, well, they didn't cross the actual Red Sea, they crossed in a gulf, and maybe they crossed it at low tide, so they were, ankle deep here. It's nonsense to me. Why have an account of it if it's not an amazing, miraculous event? Why would I put it in there if they crossed when the tide was out? This was something God did. This was something God did, a miraculous event, and parted the waters, and enough that an army could be destroyed when the waters come back to where they were. So we'll get into that, but in reading some commentaries, I may or may not have thrown away a couple of commentaries of mine because the mentality behind it is like, well, where they actually crossed, it's possible that just the water recedes because it's hot that time of year. And I saw one comment or one suggestion online that said this was all due to a cataclysmic event in some volcano that erupted in the time period. And so, Dirk, yes. Oh, Bobby, one of you. Yes. You have to say something now.
This is such a significant part of the whole story that God's given us, because it marks their salvation. As it marks our salvation, they were saved through water. And it becomes the whole story. So it cannot mean but these people were
I think the easy thing to do is to read it and go, I would have done better. These guys were, naive, foolish people that, even if I'm looking at it in hindsight, I would have made all the right decisions. We wouldn't have, right? Like, you're looking into, we talked today about systemic oppression and systems that oppress people. That was systemic oppression. Those people had been forced into 400 years of oppression. It is ingrained in their systems and who they are. They did not understand yet how to trust and how to serve and how to understand God's ability and what he was going to do. And so there has to be, my first pass is always, are you serious? Like you guys aren't even out yet. Like you haven't even had your first meal and you're already griping and moaning. But also, this is brand new territory for them. And they're frightened and they're afraid and they're people.